And then one thing I'll do is place it on a YouTube channel that I have. And Deborah, it's not because I look so cool, but it's actually to remind myself of sometimes what I've assigned and what kind of trouble I've gotten students into. But it also gives you a chance then to go back and refresh over the material before it's over. Okay. I don't think you two guys know each other. So before we start, and Chris, you can introduce your kitten if you want at the same time. Why don't we do introductions? Deborah, so you know, Chris and I have had coursework together, but I've taught at Nazarene Theological Seminary since I think about 2006. So just rounding out about my 15th year. And prior to that, taught at Trevecca Nazarene University. Started actually teaching age level ministries primarily. My area was Christian education broadly, and also teaching courses in spiritual formation and theology at Trevecca. When I came to NTS, over time, I've developed more of an interest in also leadership and innovation, some of those kinds of areas. So I've been active working in entrepreneurship and design thinking now for about 7 or 8 years as a part of the portfolio of what I teach at NTS, as well as courses in theology. So that'll give you a little bit of an introduction. My wife and I live in Olathe. We have one daughter who's a strength and conditioning coach at the College of Charleston, South Carolina, and then one pet Chihuahua that you may hear from before the evening's over with. So that's me from that standpoint. Chris, you want to make an introduction, and then we'll turn it over to Deborah next.
Yeah. So my name's Chris Summers. This should be my last semester here at NTS, unless somehow someone ropes me into doing further coursework down the road. But hopefully this will be kind of like my last 9 weeks of work out here. I'm the executive director of a small nonprofit in my hometown. So I'm working about a block away from where I was born. Can you still hear me okay, Dr. Blevins?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. So working about a block away from where I was born at. So we're a pretty small operation. There's me and one other staff member and a boatload of volunteers. We do after school programming, summer programming. One of the things that I'm really excited about connecting to this class is we just got a grant pretty recently, a very small grant of just $1,000, but to kind of kickstart a youth entrepreneur club. So we're going to do Young Entrepreneurs Club for a 4-week test run this summer. And then if it goes well, see if I can't get 5 times the funding next year for something. But kind of like a little proof of concept with a small group of kids. That's going to be this July. So hopefully we'll be able to apply a lot of what we're learning here, as well as I've been going through Youth Front's site, Dr. Blevins, and pulling stuff from there. So that's a little bit about me. You saw my cat, Ellie, hopping around here. My wife, Sarah, is on the other side of my camera right now.
So it's just so long as Sarah doesn't make faces at you while you're trying to speak, well, I guess we'll be okay. So,
it's all the time. It's all the time.
I get that. Okay, Deborah?
Yeah, my name's Deborah Mitchell. I currently live in Kansas City, on the Missouri side. Not in Raytown, but very close to Raytown, if you know where that is, Chris. I just finished my first year at NTS. And then part of the reason that I wanted to take this class is actually also because we just got a grant, weirdly. My church did. We just applied and found out Tuesday officially that we got it, which is exciting. Like a week ago today. So yeah, as a church, we have a very big building, but a small congregation. I go to St. Paul's Church of the Nazarene, that's where I serve. And so we've been trying to figure out how to use that building for the community. We do feel like we're planted in this specific community for a reason, and we want to help that community and serve that community. And so we've been looking at like partnering with other organizations like nonprofits or things like that. We've been looking at starting our own, kind of a lot of different things. And the grant isn't specifically for that, but we're hoping that maybe through like some of the connections that we formed, that maybe it'll grow into something like that. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to take this class when I kind of found out more about it, is it does again kind of seem like Chris talked about, kind of apply to my ministry situation right now, which is cool. I don't know, anything else? Random fact, you know Colleen, right? Dr. Blevins? Colleen
Yes,
Mitchell?
I,
Yes,
yeah, I
that's
do
my
know.
sister-in-law. So
Really? Okay.
yes,
All right.
yeah,
Welcome to the Church of the Nazarene. You can only go so far and you're going to hit somebody's relative before it's
right.
I've often equated the denomination as a giant overgrown Southern family. And coming from the Southeast, I know exactly what that means. It's a little frightening from that standpoint, but but that's neat. Colleen, they're still at St. Paul's, right? As well.
Yes. So me and my brother and my sister-in-law are all on staff there.
Okay, so I met you then during I think last fall when they had the new student get together.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now things are starting to come back together from that standpoint. Between COVID and Zoomitis, it has become somewhat disconnected as a community at one level. There's no doubt. Though what I found is that for people, Chris is a good example, at a distance, actually Zoom makes it more relational than say an asynchronous online or parachuting in for 1 week intensives, which is how we used to do things on a fairly regular basis for distance students. Okay. Well, it's good to have both of you in class. I will say, I think that did both of you also sign up for ministerial law, not ministerial, for present-centered spirituality? Okay. Chris, I know this is your last class, so it probably won't apply to you unless you get interested. But we had to postpone the class this summer, but we are hoping to bring that class back next summer and sort of follow the same format. So, Chris, if nothing else, if you need another week in Kansas City, I mean, we'll give you a reason to be here. But what we do hope to replicate that class. I've been on the board of directors of Youth Front almost the entire time since I think my first year, Ron Benefield was the president, and he introduced me to Mike King, and Mike, within the first 6 months, invited me on the Youth Front's board of directors. And it's a great organization to be a part of. And I kind of consider them, though I don't teach as much in age level ministry anymore, Mike's my connection to that day-to-day investment in both children and youth. And through the Youth Front, that's been a very powerful model of ministry. Well, let me just take a moment just to offer a brief word of prayer as we get going. And I've got a little bit of content to cover, and then we'll just talk mainly about the structure of the class beyond that. All right. Okay, let me pray for us. Gracious God, I thank you for Chris and for Deborah. I thank you for, your calling upon their lives, their active participation in ministry, and the way in which you continue to support them and their efforts. I do pray, Lord, that this would be not only just a good time together on Zoom, but a time of learning and a time where your Spirit would lead us and provide enlightenment in the things that we do. I do ask that you be with both Deborah and Chris throughout this summer, knowing the kind of fractured nature of how this class is designed. I do pray, Lord, that in the midst of their many other responsibilities, that this would be a time of, fresh learning and new application in and through their lives. I ask this in Christ's name. Amen. One thing I did think I would do is just share a brief overview to the concept of social entrepreneurship. And kind of situated a little bit. You are going to be reading a lot of books on what is social entrepreneurship. So you're going to get varying definitions, not just one, but at least it would give you kind of, so what is the professor thinking? And it's a way for me to sort of justify the big bucks for me being the professor of record for this class. If I do at least one lecture, Derek Davis sort of gives me a couple of sort of bonus points in the class from that standpoint. And I can prove that I actually did the lecture. That's one reason why I'm recording, okay? I also have a deep sense of irreverence on occasion. So Chris knows this. Deborah, you just have to hang on. But if you know Colleen, she's already probably warned you about me anyway. But I do think that I've learned maybe as I've gotten older to take myself less seriously, which just kind of gets me it's sort of in the same framework as my wife, who has never taken me seriously at all. So it just kind of keeps me humble in a kind of self-motivating way. I'm going to share my screen for a second, and let me do that. Chris, you've gone through these before. Don't go to sleep right away, okay? At least look like you're interested for a little while before you up. There he goes, just like that. Lost him.
I'm stopping my video so that I don't get any buffering with you sharing your screen.
Likely story. Yeah, I hear that. I've heard every explanation on the face of the earth. If I hear you snore, you're in trouble. Yeah,
it's just an excuse to play with my cat.
Okay. Well, let me talk a little bit about social entrepreneurship, and subtitle here really is kind of a play on terms. This idea of innovating social agency for the social good is a part of what social entrepreneurship is about. And so the word social has real profound implications in the way in which this field is defining itself. You're going to run into a definition fairly early, at least by week 3, from Ashoka House. Ashoka House is one of maybe the top 4 or 5 international organizations in social entrepreneurship dedicated to change making. And they are a very powerful network of social entrepreneurs around the world, some of whom came actually, Chris, to help Youth Front in establishing their youth entrepreneurship program. So this is an organization that has partnerships that really commit to each other. And their definition is one that I think is helpful. I've bolded a little bit, and in the kind of light blue and dark medium blue colors, you may not see it, but I'll just point it out. So Ashoka House says that social entrepreneurs are individuals with innovative solutions. That's one of the things that kind of marks this, is that this idea of innovation to society's most pressing social, cultural, and environmental challenges. And I hope you hear the big scope in behind how Ashoka House sees that. Then they go on to say that social entrepreneurs are ambitious and persistent. There's a kind of quality to them that tackling major issues and offering new ideas. And this is really important for systems level change, so that they're trying to make more long-term change happen over time. They model change-making behavior, which is a phrase that Ashoka House sort of owns. I'll just go ahead and say that. And catalyze organizations and movements where everyone can be a change maker. And in this definition, I hope you hear the sort of breadth and scope of how social entrepreneurs tend to think, and the way in which they tend to work across a broader sort of network than sometimes other types of ministries that tend to be much more, at times, local and very particular and caring for very specific individuals. And they do have this kind of vision that it's about, well, I'll just say it this way, it's about agency. And how is it through this entrepreneurial effort, this innovative effort, agency becomes really an important piece of the puzzle. So one way to think about it is that inside social entrepreneurship, there is a goal for social well-being and flourishing. And that does include individuals, obviously, but it really is this kind of idea of how do we create systems for the sake of well-being and flourishing via the exercise of what we might call social capital. Most of us tend to think about capital through the language of economics, and the way in which we think of that materially, but social entrepreneurs often think about people and organizations as a kind of capital that they're using, a kind of social capital that they employ. Chris, got a question?
Yeah, when they're talking about well-being and flourishing, are they specifically thinking from a Christianized background, or are
Not
they thinking?
necessarily, no.
Okay,
And in some ways, the idea of well-being and flourishing is my language, but it is beyond merely Christian understandings of that. But their entire organizations, Templeton Foundation is an example where human flourishing has become the kind of framework by which they're talking about the ability not merely for people to survive, but also to thrive, to flourish. And this is becoming kind of language actually replicates, provides a different way of thinking about economics. So what is economics for? Is it about money? Well, I got news. Yeah, money is also part of social entrepreneurship, but it really is economics about flourishing. And can there be ways of thinking about not the old Adam Smith version of economic exchange, but a different way of thinking about economics is a way in which we harness social capital as well as political capital, as well as monetary capital, for the sake of a bigger vision of flourishing and well-being to come out of that. So one of the major goals, I think, of social entrepreneurs, this is my language, is social empowerment. They don't always start with on the ground ministries as much as social entrepreneurs tend to create ventures that support on the ground ministries. And I think this is really a kind of unique difference in what social entrepreneurs tend to do. They tend to take that ability to try to harness what's happening in ministries that are on the ground, face to face with human beings, and saying, how can we empower them, and in empowering them, empower those that are receiving aid in and through these different ministries, and how do we lift them all? So social entrepreneurship has this kind of networking vision. Rob Gailey, who's a good friend of mine, might be somebody that you would choose to interview. At Point Loma. Worked for World Vision. At one point, he's taught in the MBA program at Point Loma Nazarene University now for, I think, 7 or 8 years, and has been a major coach and guide to Nazarene Compassionate Ministries International and other major organizations like that. And one of Rob's famous things is, if you really want to make a difference in a city, he would often say, people say, well, we need to start a ministry with fill in the blank. And Rob would say, don't go start a ministry with, but go find a ministry that's already doing that and figure out how to empower them to do that better. What kind of network, what kind of structure can you put in place that might help 1, 2, 3, 4 of those ministries that are already doing that kind of work do it even better through your harnessing of these sort of social networking? And we will see that happening a lot as a part of how social entrepreneurs tend to think. They are very interested in on the ground change, but this language of everybody's a change maker. They actually believe that the recipients of care and it really ought to be ultimately the final change makers if they can accomplish that. One way to think about this, I used to teach class in compassionate ministry at Trevecca Nazarene University for several years. Actually was a representative for Trevecca with NCM at one point. And one way to think about compassionate engagement is to kind of recognize that there are different kinds of ministries. I'll use that language since we're in a Christian setting, or agencies would be another language that you could use, that really accomplish different things. And so there are relief networks. These are places where certain agencies or ministries go in when communities lack basic resources, often due to a crisis, so there's no real kind of internal support even possible. And so the agency focus is literally to provide goods and services that the community itself cannot harness whatsoever. Does that make sense? Can you think of a ministry like that really is just really kind of focuses on relief aid and responds to that in pretty dramatic ways?
Probably most food banks.
Food banks would be one of that. Harvesters, for instance, would be one, where there are food deserts, for instance, where they would have to intercede within that. One that comes to mind for me, some of you may have heard of Heart to Heart Ministries. That's actually run by a Nazarene, Gary Morse, used to be a doctor here in Olathe. They're in Ukraine right now. And one of the most recent things they did is they arrange to create an emergency room in a box. So it's a freestanding emergency room, complete with all the equipment needed. Looks like about a half-size trailer, and they literally drop it in the middle of regions that do not have medical support, and all they need is power to plug it in, and then it's ready to go. And it even comes with those kinds of supplies. And they've also been good to reach disaster needs during times of hurricanes. You probably know the famous one in Church Nazarene are the crisis care kits, which actually they mobilize and then bring to provide for people when those very basics aren't available. And there's a real need for that, but often those are time limited, not always, but often they're time limited needs, hope to kind of infuse a community with the basics to give them time to kind of get back on their feet after a crisis is done, right? The next one is one that actually NTS is exploring more these days, is community development. And this is probably where most of our compassionate ministry centers sort of fall into. And they really go into communities that often possess what I would call scarce resources. They're not completely absent of resource, but there is a level of scarcity there. And so there needs to be some kind of a hybrid between external and internal support, as well as external and internal, sometimes even infrastructure, to kind of make a difference to help that community survive and move beyond a subsistence level sort of kind of existence. So the agency focuses in some ways as being both a provider and a developer of goods and services. Does that make sense? And Chris, in some ways, I think the ministry you have with young, with youth who are coming in and through broken homes, been part of the prison system, those kinds of things, there are some resources, but they are so scarce, and to provide that kind of, and hear this language, not merely financial support, but human connection that may not be available to them because of the brokenness and the fabric of the neighborhood and the communities are a part of, is a kind of community development model where you're hoping to at least help move them beyond subsistence level and find a new form of functioning and hopefully flourishing over time if the opportunity presents itself from that standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah. One of the biggest issues that I run into with donors is those that work community development, is those that want us to be relief and not quite understand we're not hitting the numbers of other people because that's not our goal.
Right. And numbers, you can hit big numbers in relief because you're only there normally for a very short time. And the need is normally envisioned as short term. Now we've understood that's a problem. I mean, there was a marvelous article written by Philip Yancey 25 years ago now, when kind of World Vision found its agency and several other Christian organizations sort of began to happen. It was during some of the droughts in Africa and some of the most massive bouts of starvation that occurred in, if memory serves me, in East Africa. And what would happen is these agencies would go in, and you have all seen those pictures of starving children, emaciated, no support. And they went in to provide basic water, basic shelter, basic, just sanitary needs. And then they moved into, once they kind of got people sort of began to survive, they moved into a community development model and began to help rebuild villages. So they moved to that. They reshot all their promotional material about how now they're bringing these people back to a different sort of level of thriving, and the money stopped. It began to run out. And they realized if they went back to the older commercials, the older marketing that showed starving children, they could get the money back. People reacted at that kind of visceral level. And Yancey writes this beautiful article about the moral conundrum, because these communities are still they're kind of still at a scarce resource subsistence level. How do you help them move to the point of having agency when everybody wants to give money, it really wants to just help starving babies not starve anymore. And Chris, your conundrum is really this relief mindset. People feel good about that versus a community development that takes longer. And the change is more incremental because it's not from totally bad to surviving, but actually from surviving to subsistency to moving on. And it's harder to document. Okay. Third major approach tends to be more community advocacy. I don't know of a community development director who hasn't run into this one. When you start running into systems where you understand that there are structural impediments, often in government oversight, and then it's no longer about merely helping people, but you also have to advocate for them, particularly around legal and political structural inequities. And normally that's the moment when, and I'll say it this way, that people working in church-based ministries, there's a kind of, the word woke doesn't work well anymore, but it's a kind of awakening, if you will, when you realize that, yeah, you really can help these people, but if you don't address some of the political inequities and some of the social inequities around them, they can't just pull themselves up by their bootstraps because there's somebody actually trying to take the boots away from them on a regular basis. And that's a third major approach. A lot of ministries operate across these, but sometimes there are conundrums. What I want you to see social entrepreneurship doing is basically saying, we can help across any of these, but more than that, we want to basically think about the empowerment of people in such a way that when people really need the opportunity and the access, not only to receive, but to contribute to their well-being, maybe even to help others, to provide service, then all of a sudden social entrepreneurs start to think, how can we mobilize the social capital, Chris, to respond to the very need that you're talking about? What can I do as a social entrepreneur to connect to the right kind of people who have a bigger vision than just relief, that really understand what it takes to make long-term change, and how can I broker that for the sake of agencies who are still spending a lot of time just trying to make a difference in the day-to-day. And so social entrepreneurship many times takes up that challenge. They're more of a broker, often between existing community development efforts and some larger independent means of community agency at times. And so you'll be listening to different people. It isn't that social entrepreneurs don't create products. Sometimes they do. And they actually use that product as a social resource, but they're constantly thinking about how to move the needle, if you will, toward agency and empowerment over time in such a way that rather than providing relief aid to women in Africa, how do we empower those women to become agents of their own economic gain? And in doing so, provide for them the kind of ability to move forward. And social entrepreneurs might not be the experts in the legal side, but they might say, and what kind of legal support do they need? So there is a kind of mindset of networking that's really embedded within this sort of social entrepreneurship side of engagement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you find many 501c3s that fall into social entrepreneurship, or is that more of like a C4 or?
I've run into some 501c3s that do this, and I've even run into LLCs that do this because of the way in which they're situated, and so often they are trying to make that next. Probably the best way to think of it is how do I take an agency or a ministry that is in the face-to-face engagement, and how do I seek for empowerment in the midst of that? And remember that empowerment here is social capital. Empowerment sometimes is not just so that people can make money. That is part of social capital, but it's also helping them find voice, decision-making, being able to do things as a part of what they're in the midst of receiving aid, and to understand that their vision is more toward a possibility of flourishing, not merely survival or subsistence as time goes along. Okay. Well, a couple other things. This is not a long PowerPoint slide. It is still entrepreneurship. Chris has already had a heavy dose of this. Deborah, at some point, I have a different class on innovation and design. And if you drink the Kool-Aid, you might come back, but you might talk to Chris first, see if it's worth your time. Okay. But it is entrepreneurship because of the innovation that's involved in this kind of work. Really, there is a lot of times where social entrepreneurs still risk quite a bit. They put themselves out there, and a lot of times the networking doesn't always work well. It doesn't always come together. Things do fall through, and there are moments where it can be a very frustrating exercise. But there's also incredible moments of innovation when sometimes networks come together, new structures emerge that people haven't thought about before, and how they harness and work toward, say, collective impact. And there's a great example of that actually in Africa, and how a church in Bethany, Oklahoma began to work with multiple agencies, and through the collective impact of all of that work, really had a massive influence in addressing AIDS across all of Eswatini. And so those are the kinds of moments when things happen that are pretty amazing as a result of it. There are fiscal responsibilities are often born of the leadership. One of the things I will say is that social entrepreneurs tend not to work for CMCs, but they tend to run CMCs, or they tend to move beyond them and begin to work with in sort of models of ministry that connect to multiple CMCs and try to work on their behalf as a part of what's happening. And I think that's an interesting moment. It's beyond the scope of this class, but a lot of community development agencies really are comprised of two different types of personalities, if you will. One group tend to love to work with the people. They connect well, they relate well, they are highly skilled at the relational component. Then there are other people working in compassionate ministry that really tend to think more structurally. They tend to be much more attentive to the bottom line. They tend to be more aware of the positioning of that center. And in what we found, when I was working in compassionate ministry more through Trevecca, there's a lot of people that were called to compassionate ministry or community development that had that heavy relational component, and they were very good working under someone else. They were gold. But to put them in charge of a compassionate ministry center tended to limit the scope of what that center could accomplish, because they could never disembed themselves from the one-on-one enough to think in a broader way. And there is that Tom Neese, who's probably the best known leader in compassionate ministry in the Church Nazarene, was very clear to me now, almost 20 years ago, that was to him one of the key challenges. That he began to see a large influx in the compassionate ministry of people who work very well relationally, but not necessarily the kind of people who would run centers and think about their strength and ability over the long term. And that his vision, actually creating NCM Inc., was as much to begin to cultivate and curate that kind of level of leadership for the sake of a lot of CMCs, a lot of compassionate ministry centers that were opening, lasting about 3 years and closing dramatically, because the leadership just wasn't ready to handle that. One way to think about it from a corporate agency versus individual agency mindset is that many times compassionate ministry centers are crucial. They're the most important piece of this puzzle as far as I'm concerned. It's one reason why I do believe in community development as an important component of this. But often a CMC is always thinking about, let's find a way to help each and every person. Where social entrepreneurs often say, let's find agencies to support that are both helping and empowering each and every person. And that's a kind of subtle shift that you're going to see I think, as you read the literature of what's going on. I will say that entrepreneurs do work at every level of social good, including crisis response, the things Gary Morse has done. when it comes to relief is phenomenal. I mean, it's just amazing, his innovation and what he's been able to envision and do through heart-to-heart ministry. He is an entrepreneur, even though relief agency work is what heart-to-heart does most and does best. But many times social entrepreneurs look for larger patterns of social agency, and they want to make that happen. Okay, Chris, hand raised.
Yeah. So would like a community foundation that puts out applications for grants, would that be an example of?
It could be, particularly if that foundation was created by someone who said, this is the best mechanism by which to empower. Community foundations come from, have multiple reasons for coming into being. But you will find social entrepreneurs working in community foundation work. It's probably a better way to say it. And it's the difference from writing for grants and reading grants to see where they go best sometimes is part of it. But not every community foundation is created for the same reason. That's one I've learned the hard way. But community foundations is part of an ecosystem around this kind of work, if you will. And social entrepreneurs are very good at finding the points within the ecology, the ecosystem that surrounds a certain social need, and bringing all those pieces to bear. They may start with something very specific and very central. I mean, sometimes elegance is in the simplicity of what they do. And you're going to be reading about that, particularly through the Social Entrepreneur playbook. So sometimes elegance of simplicity is really important, but agency and empowerment is always the goal from that standpoint. And hear this language, social agency, so that it's not merely a change once, but it's a change that will lead to ongoing change that drives a lot of social entrepreneurs. And that's, sort of the difference between being a missionary and going on a work and witness trip. It really is a really different kind of way of thinking. Okay. Well, and that's pretty much sort of my introduction. I did want to talk a little about the course strategy. This is a 10-week class, so it's a fast up ramp, and it's a quick close compared to a regular semester. But with summer, 10 weeks tends to work pretty well. But it does mean that there's a kind of time on task. So the course is really designed around 3 big pieces. One is a kind of sequenced learning process through reading. And so there is a kind of programmed learning model where you're reading to think about the next week's, and then reading a book, then reading the next book, thinking about the book that you read, and then reading the next book, thinking about the last couple of books that you read, and beginning to see not merely the input of the information in the given book, because that's the terrible thing about a lot of book reviews that we do in regular grad classes or undergrad classes. We write it, we talk about its implications maybe for the class, we should at least, but then we drop the book and go on. And in this class, every book is in some ways connected to books prior and books going forward. And part of the learning is trying to keep all of these authors in your head as you continue to read forward over time. Does that make sense? There is also 3 sort of big categories that you'll be reading across. So you'll start in sort of social entrepreneurship theory, kind of big vision of social entrepreneurship. What is it? Some of the big thinkers of why social entrepreneurship. Then you'll get into practice. So what does the practice look like? And you'll spend a pretty good amount of time also on issues of leadership. Again, because leadership is really important within this model. There are people who work for social entrepreneurs. They are, but social entrepreneurs tend to be a lot more self-starters and therefore indicative of normal entrepreneurship. They actually are out creating, and therefore leadership is part and parcel of what they have to do. They're sort of required to lead others as a part of what goes on. There will also be a kind of model for the reading. If you watched my video already, basically you read a book, and I started, I'll be up front with you, I started with a couple of small texts. I didn't want you to get overwhelmed early. No need for you to drop out of the class right away. So the first one's Social Entrepreneur by Seedbed. And it is, well, you get rid of all the worksheets and stuff like that. It's less than 90 pages. So it's in kind of big font, easy read, kind of book that's written with as much with laity in mind. And then the book that follows after that one by Peter, Entrepreneurship for Human Flourishing. If you've bought it already, you could probably find it as a PDF online, but this is, you don't get smaller than this in any grad class. So you're like, wait, why? Well, because after that, things change. So I want to give you a couple of weeks so you can kind of get a feel for how you plan your reading going forward. But all I'm asking you to do is to write a very short book review, basically 750 to 1250. That's about 3 to 5 pages of 250 words a page. And the first half of the book review should be, well, what's the thesis? Kind of what was the big idea from the author, and how did the author sort of represent that? So it's kind of a gist of what's really important in the book. A lot of times, I'll go ahead and tell you, a lot of times you can get a good portion of that if you just slow down long enough to read the introduction in the book to get kind of the big flow. Okay. And then the rest of the book review is, so what does this teach you about social entrepreneurship? And as you move forward, how does this book connect to the books that you've read in the past? Does that make sense? Now, it may not always connect from one week to the next. Sometimes you may feel like you having to back up a couple of books to find a point of connection. But I'll just be upfront with you. I'm always looking for at least some dialogue with the previous author as a part of your reading. And you may spend probably an extra 20 minutes just trying to think about that point of connection as you're writing the book review. Okay. Very simple. They're due, memory serves me, they're due on Saturday. And so you get the whole week to read. You drop it in. I'll try to have it graded by Monday or Tuesday of the next week. It's not a heavy duty evaluation. The book's not, I mean, the reading's not designed to do that anyway, but I do have a rubric. I'll use it, let you know how you did, try to offer a pointer or two if it's needed. And you're just reading to read forward as time goes along. Okay. The other thing is there are supplemental videos and resources at the Moodle site. If you haven't spent time each week, I tried to tandem a reading with some videos. Some of those videos Chris recognizes comes out of a project that we did called Ministerial Entrepreneurship. And some of our people working in the field are social entrepreneurs. And so there are voices of people that we interviewed at Nazarene Theological Seminary as part of a research. And I just pulled a snippet of that out. And if you're curious to know more about that author, let me know and I can make connections to the rest of the videos before it's all said and done. But they're there just, I mean, directed studies class is awful if all you got is just the readings. And so I wanted to give you voice every week of someone that I think is representative of this field and try to give you people that you can connect to over time. Most of them are USA based. One is from Germany, and then there is a PBS special that you can find, a link inside the Moodles that have a number of entrepreneurs that are global, that actually PBS has curated those stories. So I just wanted you to have a kind of living context. And then the other component of this are the experiential interviews. One thing I want you to think about is I'd like for you to interview 3 people who are social entrepreneurs, or at least are connected that you would be interested in this field. Sometimes they may fit quite neatly. So Chris, since you'd already talked about doing youth entrepreneurship, if Kurt Redema, who's at Youth Front doing that work, becomes one of those, you just make an arrangement to have a phone conversation or a Zoom call. And the difference is you have to craft the questions you want to ask. I don't provide those for you. What I'm doing is trying to time them so as you're learning concepts and ideas in the class, you're testing them out through the interviews that you're doing with people at the same time. Okay. Deborah, for you, it might, I mean, there are some people local that you might reach out to, but again, Rob Gailey, if you're interested in having a conversation with him, for instance, I could probably send an email, and if he is in country, sometimes he's gone, could try to make that arrangement. But you may know of other people that you'd be interested in reaching. Please do. And there are people that work in community development thinking that probably would fit within this category. Chris, Jay Height comes to mind as somebody who probably sort of blends in to the social entrepreneurship world. But it's really giving you permission to have interviews with people and using the class as an excuse. So if it's nothing more than saying, hey, look, I've got this crazy professor. He told me I would lose points if I don't have these interviews. Would you please help me out? And he's in Kansas City. I can even get an email and he'll vouch for it. Use me as a means of introduction if you need to have those interviews. And then the last thing is a major project or a paper. And since both of you are already working toward a project, that can be part of what your final project is in this class, okay? So you can begin with that end in mind. Understand, I'll have criteria that we'll talk about later in the semester, but basically I'll be looking for how you're using the learning from the class to particularly flesh out what you want to try to accomplish in that project, okay? So you don't have to go looking for something abstract. It's right in your face. And that's one reason why this gives you permission to actually, say this is part of what, I'm working in the class to see how I can be effective from that standpoint. Okay. Any questions on how the class is designed?
Was there anything with forum posts? I thought I saw something about an
Just
email.
one. So let me exit out of this for a second. Bear with me, or just throw up the Moodle site. So basically, every one of the book reviews are really an assignment, so you can't see each other's book review. The only time I've laid out a forum is actually in week 4. I call it an interactive moment. And that's where all I'm asking you to do is reflect on, you've now read 3 books. So how would you begin to describe what is social entrepreneurship? And what does that look like to you? Okay. And you at least get to hear each other from that standpoint. Recognizing I've done this kind of a class with sometimes only 1 student in the course, sometimes with up to 3 or 4, I'm reluctant to require you to, post an initial post and reply to each other. I mean, by week 3, you would be ready to hit me for that kind of an assignment, But instead, I'm trying to pick strategic points where you actually can have a conversation with each other through the forum, but do it asynchronously, not set up a Zoom to make that happen, okay? You may end up getting another one like that down around, I was tempted to put one down around, I do have it, as a matter of fact, under week 7. And this is now, the only difference, I didn't change the language, but this will be defined social entrepreneurship practice in light of the reading. I got to add that word in. And I think that's about the only 2 times I had to do that. Otherwise, I think week 10, if you're willing, one thing I will do is also put a form in week 10 where each of you can see each other's projects, if that's okay. There is a summative essay, by the way, that is just kind of a moment of reflection at the end of the semester. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's really a kind of wrapping up in your brain what's important. So the project's due week 9. No, I'm sorry. It's due the first part of week 10. I think it's due on Monday, and then the essay's due on Friday of that week. And I'm not looking for any additional work for the essay. It's really a kind of synthesis of your understanding of the class. okay? Let me point out a couple of things. I won't take long. Do take time to look at the resources. For instance, I don't know how much money you've already spent. So good example is the Social Entrepreneurs Playbook it's a book, and I picked this one up some time ago. But if you haven't bought the book yet, if you click on the Wharton School Business, which is the University of Pennsylvania, they actually have a free download. And I think all you have, and it's an ebook version of it instead of a print book version. But it's one of those things, you'll find this a lot of times, that different people have different options of trying to make their resources available to you. Similarly, let me go back. Got myself in trouble, didn't I? Yep. Wait. If you go down and you're kind of contemplating reinventing organizations, for instance, which is one of the readings in here, they actually offer it through their website, and you may actually be able to buy it used cheaper than this. But right now their price, and you can get a PDF version or Mobi, is just $10. So it's a kind of Kindle price. But if you want to get it in a PDF so you can manipulate the material more, you have that common option from the organization. The only book I'll go ahead and name for you is one of the books that's required. Is Creating Value in Nonprofit Business Collaborations. And if you've looked at that on Amazon and you felt like you had swallowed your tongue because of the price of the book, it starts to feel like one of those Brill commentaries that you feel like you have to mortgage half your life for. Actually, NTS has that book through EBSCO as an electronic book, so you can just read it online. Okay, and that I would have, if I didn't know that up front, there was an alternative book to require for that time. But I thought, and it's a very big book, so obviously it's a book you're going to hear from Dr. Blevins. I think it's like 320 pages. It's a book that you'll be looking for kind of what's in the nutshell in the front end of the book, and then begin to skim to find what's most important from your standpoint and what speaks best to the class. So I don't expect you to read all 320 pages and try to memorize that work, but actually to work the book. I mean, don't you like it when a professor actually names something like that and gives you, you're probably going to do it that way anyway, but gives you permission, right? So I really do want the reading to work for you as time goes along, and try to pick texts that kind of move back and forth within the field, offering slightly different perspectives. So there'll be some redundancy, but at least some things that you feel like you get. Some books feel more like handles you'll use, toolkits. Others will be more inspirational in the way in which they're designed. Okay. All right. I'm going to see it. Is there? Oh, okay. General comment. So I'm going to stop the share and just see if you have specific questions for me before we wrap up. No? Okay. I'm on the road a lot. I'll go ahead and just name that this summer between commitments with the General Church of the Nazarene. We have a consultation. There are 2 PALCONs going on, and I'm doing workshops at both. And so I'll be in the air a lot during the week. And I've got 2 or 3 things in both psychology and theology that I'm doing. And I'm trying to write a book this summer. So I'm busy, but if you are nervous or if you hit a bump, shoot me an email and let me know how what's going on. Okay, don't be shy. The bad news is the 10 weeks. I'm pretty hard on the Saturday deadline. But if there is some kind of grave, that part of the reason I gave you Saturday is that you can turn it in on Tuesday. Some of these books you could probably do tomorrow and have it in on Thursday this first week. But one reason I gave you the Saturday is to give you permission to turn it in early. But if you get to Saturday and a crisis has occurred, because in ministry, crises always occur on Saturday, right? So if that's going to happen, yell at me, let me know ahead of time. But I am pretty strict at the end of the week, Sunday. I don't want you to fall so far behind that then suddenly you're trying to read 2 or 3 books in 1 week. It does not work. I have plenty of experience, and I can point you to students who can give testimony that tends to catch up with students in a course this tight and this condensed. Okay. All right. Well, I'll be praying for you. I hope you won't, again, we won't have another video conference. This is it. I will put this online just in case you have questions going forward. But do feel free to reach out to me as you need to. And I just hope it'll be a time of self-discovery, but also a time of growth as a part of being a part of this course. Okay. All right. Blessings to you guys. Deborah, tell Colleen I said hello. Okay. For sure. And,
Will do.
all right. By the time this class is over, you guys, you'll have your merit badge. At that point, you can start talking about your battle scars, the two of you, of having Dr. Blevins as professor. Chris has those already. He could probably show them to you at another time. Okay. All right. Chris, I'll be back with you. I promise. I'll check with Mike and let you know something. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Blessings, everybody. We'll see you.